The Eastern Front, a theatre of war so immense, so utterly devastating, that it reshaped the very concept of industrialised conflict, a place where societal norms crumbled under the relentless pressure of annihilation. Within this maelstrom of steel and fire, an unprecedented phenomenon unfolded, the widespread integration of women into the Red Army's combat ranks. These were not mere auxiliaries, tending to the wounded or staffing communication lines behind the front. No, these were soldiers, clad in the same drab uniforms as their male counterparts, wielding machine guns, piloting bombers through flak-filled skies, and patiently stalking their prey as deadly snipers. They were fighting, killing, and dying alongside the men, their resolve forged in the crucible of national survival. This monumental shift, the mobilization of nearly 1 million women into the war effort, was born of necessity, fueled by the fervour of ideology and driven by the sheer overwhelming scale of the German invasion. Operation Barbarossa, launched in the summer of 1941, ripped across the Soviet Union with a ferocity that few had anticipated. Millions of soldiers fell, vast swathes of territory were lost, and the very existence of the Soviet state hung precariously in the balance. In this desperate hour, traditional societal barriers, so carefully constructed and rigidly enforced, began to buckle and break. The integration of women into combat roles defied all established military conventions. Western armies, constrained by ingrained social prejudices and a more measured approach to mobilization, largely relegated women to support roles. The Red Army, however, driven by a doctrine of absolute mobilization and an ideological commitment, however flawed in its practice, to gender equality, embraced a radical solution. Women were actively recruited, trained, and deployed into virtually every military specialty. This was a pragmatic decision, a cold calculation born of desperation. Yet, it was also a testament to the potential unleashed when artificial constraints are shattered. For the German Wehrmacht, steeped in its own rigid notions of gender roles and societal order, the presence of armed women on the battlefield was not merely a tactical surprise, it was an abomination, a jarring dissonance that challenged the very foundations of their worldview. The Nazi ideology, predicated on the concept of the Kinder, Küche, Kirche, children, kitchen, church, relegated women to a subservient role, their primary duty being to produce racially pure offspring and maintain the domestic sphere. The sight of women wielding weapons, engaging in mortal combat, and embodying a spirit of unwavering defiance was a profound affront to this carefully constructed social order. These women were not viewed as soldiers, but as a biological and ideological threat, a symbol of the supposed degeneracy of the Soviet system. The German soldier, indoctrinated with the belief that women belonged in the home, was now confronted with women who were not only capable of fighting, but often fought with a ferocity that equalled, or even surpassed, that of their male counterparts. This dissonance created a deep-seated psychological unease, a visceral reaction that fueled the brutal treatment that awaited captured female combatants. They were not afforded the protections of the Geneva Convention. They were deemed ideological enemies, threats to the racial purity of the Reich, and marked for extermination. What brutal fate awaited them at the hands of the invaders who valued only conquest? The seeds of this unprecedented military experiment were sown long before the thunder of German artillery echoed across the Soviet plains. In the 1920s and 1930s, the Soviet Union, driven by its revolutionary zeal and a desire to modernize its society, embarked on a series of ambitious programs aimed at promoting physical fitness and military preparedness among its citizens. These initiatives, such as the Society for Aviation and Chemical Defense, OSOAVIAKHIM, played a crucial role in preparing the ground for the mass mobilization of women during the war. OSOAVIAKHIM offered training in a wide range of skills, from parachuting and marksmanship to basic piloting and chemical warfare defense. thousands of young women eager to contribute to the defense of their country flocked to these programs, acquiring valuable skills that would later prove essential on the battlefield. By 1939, more than 100,000 Soviet women had earned the coveted designation of Voroshilov sharpshooter, a testament to their proficiency in marksmanship. Thousands more had received certifications in tactical first aid, communications and anti-aircraft defense. These programs not only imparted practical skills, but also instilled a sense of national pride and a willingness to serve. They challenged traditional gender roles and created a generation of women who were prepared to defend their country, whatever the cost. However, despite these efforts, the initial response to women volunteering for combat duty after the German invasion was often met with skepticism and resistance. In the chaotic early months of the war, thousands of young women, driven by patriotism and a desire for revenge, flocked to military recruitment offices only to be turned away or relegated to support roles. Many recruitment officers, steeped in traditional notions of gender roles, doubted their ability to withstand the rigours of combat. Others simply lacked the resources to properly equip and train the influx of volunteers. This initial reluctance, however, was soon overcome by the sheer scale of the human losses suffered by the Red Army. As the German Wehrmacht advanced deeper into Soviet territory, the need for manpower became increasingly desperate. In March 1942, the State Defense Committee issued a landmark decree authorizing the mass incorporation of women into combat units. This decision, born of necessity, marked a turning point in the war and paved the way for the unprecedented integration of women into the Red Army's ranks. Recruitment campaigns were launched across the country, targeting young women with slogans that appealed to their patriotism, their sense of duty, and their desire for equality. Training programs were expanded and accelerated, and women were assigned to a wide range of combat specialties, from sniper units and aviation regiments to tank brigades and anti-aircraft batteries. By May 1942, over 200,000 women had been formally recruited into the Red Army, and by the end of the year, that number had doubled. This massive influx of female soldiers transformed the face of the Soviet military and challenged the very notion of what it meant to be a warrior. Entirely female units were formed, such as the famed aviation regiments led by Marina Raskova, women who would soon earn the grudging respect and in some cases the outright terror of their German adversaries. The creation of these all-female units served a dual purpose. Firstly, it provided a supportive environment for women who faced prejudice and discrimination from their male counterparts. Secondly, it allowed women to develop their own unique tactics and strategies, unburdened by the constraints of traditional military thinking. These units, often equipped with outdated or obsolete equipment, proved to be remarkably effective, demonstrating the ingenuity and resilience of their members. As the war progressed, the integration of women into the Red Army became increasingly seamless. While the recruitment of new combatants slowed slightly in the later years of the conflict, the existing female soldiers were increasingly integrated into elite units and assigned to positions of greater responsibility. Soviet military reports from this period reveal that women made up approximately 15% of sniper units, 20% of anti-aircraft regiments, and up to 12% of certain specialized tank brigades. These figures are a testament to the skill and dedication of these women, who proved time and again that they were more than capable of holding their own on the battlefield. The motivations that drove these women to volunteer for combat duty were complex and varied. For some, it was pure patriotism, a burning desire to defend their homeland from the invading German forces. For others, it was a thirst for revenge, a desire to avenge the deaths of loved ones who had fallen victim to the war. Many were driven by a sense of equality, a desire to prove that women were just as capable as men in all fields of endeavour, including military service. For young women from rural or working-class backgrounds, the army offered a rare opportunity for social mobility, a chance to escape the limitations of their traditional roles and pursue a career in a field that had previously been closed to them. Whatever their individual motivations, these women shared a common bond, a willingness to sacrifice everything for the sake of their country. The ideological chasm that separated the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany extended far beyond the realm of political systems and economic structures. It permeated every aspect of society, dictating even the most intimate details of daily life. Nowhere was this ideological clash more starkly evident than in the contrasting conceptions of gender roles. In Nazi Germany, the role of women was rigidly defined by the principle of the Kinder, Küche, Kirche, children, kitchen, church. This seemingly simple phrase encapsulated a complete vision of a woman's place in German society. The ideal Nazi woman was expected to devote herself primarily to procreation, conceiving it as a biological service to the state equivalent to male military service. She was to efficiently manage the household, ensuring it functioned as a microcosm of the order the regime intended for society as a whole. And she was to preserve traditional Christian values, cleansed of Judaizing elements according to Nazi interpretation, passing these values on to the next generation. Any deviation from this tripartite model was considered not only a social anomaly, but a threat to the racial future of the German people, and by extension, to the very stability of the Reich. This vision was institutionalized in concrete programs administered by the Reichsfrauenführung, Reich Women's Leadership, under the leadership of Gertrude Scholz-Klink. The 1933 marriage incentive law offered loans to racially pure German couples, which increased significantly if the woman left paid employment. The Cross of Honor of the German Mother, instituted in 1938, awarded bronze, silver or gold medals to women who had 4, 6 or 8 children respectively. The Lebensborn, Fountain of Life program, initiated by Heinrich Himmler in 1935, established special homes where racially valuable women could give birth, even out of wedlock, ensuring that no potential Aryan child would be lost due to social conventions. Educational policies meticulously reinforced this ideology. The female curriculum in Nazi secondary schools, Bund Deutscher Mädel, BDM, significantly reduced mathematics and sciences, replacing them with courses in home economics, childcare, and racial biology. Universities imposed numerous clauses that limited the proportion of female students to 10%, while professions such as medicine and law set even more restrictive quotas for women. As the war progressed, the ideology experienced tactical adaptations, but no fundamental revisions. The growing need for labour in the armaments industry forced the regime to employ more women in factories, partially contradicting its own doctrine. This contradiction was managed through an elaborate system of justifications that framed women's labour as a temporary sacrifice under exceptional circumstances, not as an ideological evolution. Joseph Goebbels, in his 1943 speech Women at War, emphasised that industrial labour by women was a momentary deviation, imposed by emergency, from the natural path of the German woman. However, even these pragmatic adaptations had unreachable limits. Adolf Hitler repeatedly opposed recruiting women for direct military service, even when the situation on the fronts deteriorated catastrophically. In a military conference in January 1945, when some generals suggested forming female auxiliary units for anti-aircraft defence, Hitler responded, "I would rather lose the war than allow German women to become masculinized in military service. National Socialist Germany will never forget that a woman's natural destiny is to be a mother." This rigid conception of gender roles was profoundly challenged when German troops encountered Soviet women on the battlefield. For the Nazi mindset, the female combatant represented a fundamental transgression of the natural order, a perfect example of the degeneration that, according to their propaganda, characterized the Soviet system. Alfred Rosenberg, chief ideologist of the Nazi Party, described this female participation as the ultimate proof that Bolshevism destroys even natural sexual characteristics, producing a monstrous third gender, neither man nor woman. Nazi vocabulary developed specific terms to dehumanize these combatants. Flintenweiber, riflewomen, was systematically used in official documents, military orders, and propaganda. This term not only expressed contempt, but served an essential psychological function by denying these women the status of Soldaten, female soldiers. They were also denied the dignity and rights associated with legitimate combatants under international conventions. Nazi gender ideology established a simplistic yet powerful dichotomy. Women were divided into two mutually exclusive categories: the virgin mother, represented by the German woman who fulfilled her reproductive duty within Aryan marriage, and the degenerate prostitute, associated with women who transgressed norms of femininity. Armed Soviet women were immediately classified into this second category, considered representatives of a system that, according to Nazi theorists, perverted the natural laws they claimed to uphold. This ideological categorization justified extreme violence. If Soviet female combatants represented the antithesis of the natural order defended by Nazism, their physical elimination became not only acceptable, but necessary. Martin Bormann, head of the Nazi Party Chancellery, wrote in a 1942 memorandum, "The Soviet Flintenweiber is not an ordinary prisoner of war, but the very embodiment of Bolshevism that we must eradicate from Europe." This perspective provided the ideological foundation for the execution orders that would later be implemented by combat units. The stark contrast between the Soviet and Nazi ideologies regarding gender roles translated into drastically different approaches to military strategy and the treatment of prisoners of war. The Red Army, despite its own internal contradictions and limitations, embraced the concept of total mobilization, integrating women into direct combat roles on an unprecedented scale. Soviet female fighters served as snipers, bomber pilots, tank commanders, anti-aircraft gunners, and infantry soldiers, actively participating in some of the fiercest battles on the Eastern Front. Their presence on the battlefield challenged conventional military thinking and forced the German Wehrmacht to confront an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. Female sniper units constitute one of the most emblematic examples of this integration. Specialized training for snipers formally began in 1943 with the opening of the Central Women's Sniper School in Podolsk, although many women had already been serving in this role since 1941. The course initially lasted 6 months and included 450 hours of technical instruction, 50 hours of ballistic theory, 130 hours of shooting practice with various rifles, mainly the Mosin Nagant with PU 3.5x scope, 120 hours of camouflage and stealth movement, and 150 hours of reconnaissance and target selection. As frontline needs intensified, the course was compressed to 3 months, doubling the daily training hours. A Soviet sniper's standard equipment included the Mosin Nagant 9130 rifle with a telescopic sight, 120 rounds of special sniper ammunition, a Tokarev TT-33 pistol as a secondary weapon, F-1 defensive grenades, dry rations for 7 days, a seasonally adapted camouflage uniform, the white padded maskirovka for winter or the letny zeleny for summer, and specialized tools like 6x30 binoculars, a military wristwatch, and a waterproof notebook to record weather conditions and shots fired. Lyudmila Pavlichenko, the deadliest female sniper in history, achieved 309 confirmed kills, including 36 enemy snipers in direct duels. Her technique revolutionized sniper tactics by developing the paired hunting system, in which one sniper fired while the other observed and recorded environmental variables. This tactical innovation was later adopted by male snipers and became standard Red Army doctrine. The Night Witches of the 588th Night Bomber Regiment represent another extraordinary case of female participation in combat. Founded by Marina Raskova in October 1941 and later commanded by Yevdokia Bashanskaya, this regiment was composed entirely of women: pilots, navigators, mechanics, and support personnel. Equipped with obsolete Polikarpov Po-2 biplanes, they developed a unique approach technique. They climbed to 3,000 meters, cut their engines near the target, and glided silently over enemy positions before dropping their bombs. The only sound audible to German troops was the whisper of wind on the wings, earning them the nickname Night Witches, Nachthexen. These aviators completed 24,000 combat missions during the war, dropping 23,000 tons of bombs. They did so under extraordinarily adverse conditions without radar, without radios, navigating by compass and star charts, without parachutes until 1944 due to the extra weight-reducing bomb load capacity, and in wooden canvas planes that could catch fire with a single tracer round. Each crew performed between 8 and 18 missions per night, returning to reload bombs between flights, meaning many pilots accumulated over 800 missions throughout the war. Female participation in armoured and artillery units, though less known, was equally significant. Approximately 15,000 women served in tank regiments and mechanised units. Maria Oktyabrskaya, after losing her husband in combat, sold all her possessions to donate a T-34 tank to the army on the condition that she be allowed to pilot it. She named her tank Fighting Girlfriend, Bovaya Podruga, and led assaults against German positions until her death in January 1944, becoming the first female tank operator to receive the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. The statistical distribution by female military specialties reveals significant patterns. Of the 800,000 women who served in the Red Army, 300,000 were assigned to anti-aircraft defense units, comprising 26% of the total personnel in that specialty. 40,000 served as combat medics on the front lines, 300,000 in communications and signal units, 43,000 as snipers and scouts, 2,000 as pilots and aviation navigators, and the rest in various roles from regular infantry to heavy artillery. The motivations driving these women to request combat positions were complex and diverse. Studies based on direct testimonies and personal correspondence identify several recurring factors: intense patriotism and the desire to defend their homeland, revenge for relatives killed during the invasion, the pursuit of equality, and the desire to prove capabilities traditionally denied to women. The social mobility offered by the army to young women from rural or working-class backgrounds, an ideological commitment to Soviet values of equality. This massive integration of women into the war effort faced significant internal resistance. Many female combatants testified to encountering initial skepticism and even hostility from conservative officers and male comrades. Alexandra Boyko, a radio operator in Kursk, wrote in her diary, "At first, the men looked at us like we were aliens. The commissar had to give a special talk, reminding them that we were there for the same reasons as they were. However, their proven combat effectiveness gradually dissolved much of this resistance." By 1944, internal reports from the Soviet General Staff explicitly acknowledged that units with a high proportion of women showed significantly lower desertion rates and greater cohesion in situations of extreme stress. The presence of women in combat roles profoundly transformed the nature of warfare on the Eastern Front. For the Germans, accustomed to a rigid separation between combatants and civilians based on gender, the encounter with women who killed as effectively as men was not only a tactical shock, but an existential challenge to their worldview, significantly contributing to the brutalization of the conflict and the ruthless treatment faced by those who were captured. A brutal extermination campaign followed. The systematic elimination of Soviet female combatants by German forces was not a series of isolated incidents. It was the result of a deliberate policy, codified in specific orders issued by the highest levels of the military hierarchy. These directives, meticulously documented in military archives recovered after the war, reveal the institutionalization of practices that blatantly violated international conventions regarding prisoners of war. The first explicit order related to female combatants was issued by Field Marshal Walter von Reichenau, commander of the German Sixth Army, on October 10, 1941, as the Reichenau Befehl. Von Reichenau, unlike von Rundstedt, was an enthusiastic supporter of Nazism who had played a key role in reconciling the traditional army with Hitler's regime. His order reflected deep ideological conviction and was distributed as a model for other units. In fact, Hitler was so impressed with this directive that he ordered its circulation to all commanders on the Eastern Front as exemplary conduct guidelines. At the divisional level, these general directives were implemented through more specific orders adapted to local circumstances. These orders often stipulated women in Russian uniforms or with weapons must be shot immediately as a rule, without prior interrogation or transfer to prisoner collection points. The application of these policies varied geographically as the war progressed. In the Baltic regions and Belarus, where the German military administration was more firmly established, executions followed more formalized protocols, often including photographs for documentation. In Ukraine, especially in areas controlled by SS units rather than the regular army, executions tended to be more improvised and brutal, frequently accompanied by torture and sexual violence. As the war progressed and the military balance of power shifted, some German commanders began to question the strategic effectiveness, though not necessarily the moral justification of these policies. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, after taking command of Army Group South in 1943, issued directives that, without revoking previous orders, suggested discretion in the processing of special elements to avoid unnecessarily intensifying enemy resistance. This tactical adjustment, however, had limited effect on the day-to-day practices of frontline units, where the execution of captured female combatants remained the norm. The legal justification the Germans used for these executions was based on twisted interpretations of international law. The main argument articulated in a legal memorandum prepared by the legal department of the OKW High Command of the Armed Forces in August. 1941 claimed that the Soviet Union, having not ratified the 1929 Geneva Convention on Prisoners of War, was outside its protection. This argument conveniently ignored the fact that both Germany and the USSR were still bound by the earlier 1907 Hague Convention, which established basic humanitarian standards for the treatment of captured combatants, explicitly including women. The Nazi propaganda machine played a crucial role in dehumanizing Soviet female combatants, creating a psychological framework that facilitated their systematic elimination. The term Flintenweiber, riflewomen, was the centerpiece of this discursive strategy. This derogatory neologism, literally rifle women or armed women, first appeared in official Ministry of Propaganda documents in July 1941 and was quickly integrated into military, administrative, and journalistic vocabulary. The deliberate application of terror dehumanized the women and gave the invaders confidence to commit atrocities in the name of victory and a distorted vision of society. The survivors developed specific techniques to preserve their psychological integrity in the face of systematic dehumanization. One practice documented in multiple testimonies was the Whispered University, Shepotny University. During the few hours of rest, prisoners with academic or technical training gave brief, whispered lessons in their areas of expertise. These clandestine activities not only transferred practical knowledge useful for survival, but also served a vital psychological function, maintaining a sense of identity and human dignity. Liberation, however, did not mark the end of suffering for these survivors. After the victory over Germany, many faced new trauma, suspicion, and discrimination within their own society. The Stalinist regime, deeply distrustful of those who had fallen into enemy hands, viewed surrender almost as betrayal. Soviet High Command Order 270, issued in August 1941, had declared that there are no Soviet prisoners of war, only traitors, a stance that, although later moderated, established a framework of generalized suspicion. Interrogations by SMERSH, Soviet military counterintelligence, of repatriated individuals could last for weeks, using aggressive techniques aimed at identifying potential collaborators. Like many former prisoners, she received the restrictive classification of politically dubious element, limiting her post-war educational, professional, and residential opportunities. The experiences of these survivors were often silenced in the official Soviet post-war narrative. While the stories of women who died heroically in combat were celebrated in monuments and patriotic literature, the complex and ambiguous experiences of those who had survived captivity were uncomfortable for a regime that preferred triumphalist narratives. Many survivors chose self-imposed silence, carrying their trauma and memories as a private burden for decades. The courage and sacrifice of these women, both those who died in combat and those who survived captivity, remain a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and a powerful reminder of the devastating consequences of ideological extremism. The silence has endured